So as most of you will know, I've just come back off a little trip away, and I won't bore you with snaps of my time over there. Actually, we'll be here for hours. But there was a time when I was in the middle of London. I got lost, which is not common. I was expecting that to happen. I think I spoke to a few people about it before I left. The GPS stopped working, didn't know where I was. And I stumbled across this kind of nice little area that had about 3 or 4, 5 restaurants in a row, and one in a box. It was quite common. So I went and found this ramen restaurant, which was fantastic. Sat in there, was eating my noodle soup, and enjoying the hospitality. It was a great place. And I found a little bit of Wi-Fi, so it was nice and relaxed. Messaging Kylie and the parents. Finished my lunch, and then walked out to the end of this kind of lane, the street thing. Okay, where am I going to go from here? I'll just walk in this general direction until I find, hopefully, my hotel on the other side of London. And then one of the servers came up to me on the end of the street. This is really great. This is nice. Really good service. I must have left my phone behind or something. Not uncommon. He said, "Sir, did you just say that whatever the response? I've forgotten it." I said, "Yeah, I did. Did I?" He said, "You haven't paid." So I did the walk of shame all the way back to the restaurant where there was the manager waiting outside for me and someone else. I said, "I'm so sorry." I just did it. Anyway. Goodness me. So that's my highlight from my trip. Would you like to know that?
Sounds just like you.
Luckily, they had mercy for me. And they saw that I was just an absent-minded Australian, and there was no action taken. Thank goodness. So the story of the Good Samaritan is an absolutely marvellous parable. It's fantastic. I mean, Jesus said these things with such colourful and powerful imagery for a purpose, for a reason. He got his points across incredibly clearly to a group of people, crowds of people, often that came from very different walks of life. Of course, we have the fishermen who followed Jesus. Now, they weren't sort of peasants, I guess, so to speak, in the traditional sense that we understand them. Fishing was quite a good way to make a living. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't on the streets. And then he had people who were beggars who followed him. He had lawyers who gave up everything, tax collectors who gave up everything and followed him. So, any of you have done any public speaking before, or have tried to communicate something to someone, would realise how hard it would be in that kind of situation when you have people from incredibly highly educated to not so well educated, all in the same place, and you're trying to get a sort of a revolutionary point across. And a point across about God, which is different to what the culture is used to. But Jesus did that. And he did that in some incredibly powerful ways. So I'm always excited to preach on the Good Samaritan, but then there's the danger that you say something that's been said 100 times before. Because it's such a common thing to preach on for very good reason. It speaks across time and space, and it will continue to speak to us until we exist as a race of people, I'm sure. But who were the Samaritans? Do we know that much about them? We know a little bit, I guess, at times. I'm sure you've been told that the Samaritans were people who weren't accepted in the Jewish community at the time. Jesus being a good, faithful Jewish person and his followers at the time, this would have been shocking to them. And it was a lawyer who was asking this question. He would have been well aware of the place in society that the Samaritans held. And Jesus most probably chose this parable for that very purpose, because it would have shaken the foundation of what he understands. Now, the Samaritans, we shouldn't actually speak of them in past tense, because they still exist. There's just over 800 Samaritans living still today in Israel. Most of them live in a place called Mount Gerizim, which is it's actually a biblical mountain from the Old Testament, and that actually is the main reason why they were so different. and why they were maligned by the sort of mainline Jewish community. So most of them live in that area, and some, a small amount, live just outside Tel Aviv, the city of Holon. I had to check those facts. Now, they're a continuing community of people. And the Samaritans claim that actually they're an unbroken line, right through from the time of Joshua all the way up to modern day. That's part of the argument as well. I won't get into it because it's incredibly complex. It's a really complex history, and it's very contested. So whatever I say will probably upset someone, right? Which is part of the course, really. It's not unusual, but especially in this case, I don't want to speak on somebody else's culture. But they're a continuing group of people, the Samaritans. They exist today. They have ancient traditions. They still slaughter and sacrifice animals. It's all very messy. And they're very proud to be that people. They also claim to hold the oldest existing written Torah, which is really interesting. If you're ever over there, try and get in to see the Samaritans. But most of the issues, the main one, the big one, that set them apart in Jesus' time and still, to some extent today, is that they did not agree with the temple in Jerusalem. They did not think that that is the place of worship. And they were not willing to be convinced that it was and go and worship with everyone else. They claimed that Mount Gerizim, I could be pronouncing it incorrectly, was the place of worship, the rightful place of worship. And that's because the camps were set up there just as they'd come out of exile, the Israel people. So they claim this is the place where we are supposed to worship. And you can imagine how that would set them apart from the people of the first century in Jerusalem. They were maligned, they were not accepted. There were rumours that they were not clean. They had Gentile blood within them. In fact, they did some really strange Gentile ceremonies which weren't right compared to the traditional Jewish faith. They could be dangerous. In fact, people, when they were travelling to Jerusalem, were known to, the direct route was just sort of through close to where the Samaritans were. They would take a massive arch around that area to get into Jerusalem, to miss them. So they were seen as dangerous, they were seen as rebels, they didn't worship correctly, they were spiritually wrong, and they were not one of the proper chosen people. And yet, Jesus chooses them as his example, as the one following exactly what he just told the lawyer to do. It's interesting to note, and it takes us even further, that just a few verses before the last chapter of this book, the Samaritans completely reject Jesus. He goes into a Samaritan village, and they reject him. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of them. On their way they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him, but they did not receive him, because his face was sent toward Jerusalem. When his disciples James and John saw it, they said, "Lord, what do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. So these Samaritans not only were not accepted by the Jewish community at the time, they directly rejected Jesus. They turned him away. Why? Because his face was sent towards Jerusalem. Now, what was the conflict of the time, and still is today? They didn't worship at Jerusalem. He was heading there. They don't accept that. Jesus is out as well. James and John, how did they react? Do you want us to send fire down upon this village? Do you want us to condemn these people? Does God want to wipe them out? Does God want to destroy them because they have rejected you? What does Jesus do? He rebukes them. It simply goes to another village. It's a little bit of a stark contrast from our reading from Amos this morning. What was going on there? God was getting angry. He was getting ready to wipe out some people. It's interesting how different cultures interpret God's voice amongst them. That's not how that story ends. We'll get that next week. So, the story of the Good Samaritan is actually a little bit more, confounding than what we first expect. Especially if we look in Scripture and try and find some other examples. Jesus has been rejected by these people. They've been rejected by his religious community. And yet, when the lawyer asks what he must do to inherit the kingdom, Jesus uses a Samaritan as the example. Now, reading from Paul, I think, this morning, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful encouragement. He starts up with this letter to some fledgling Christian communities, as he always does, lavishes them with compliments. We've heard wonderful things about you. We know that your faith is strong, and we just want to encourage you. It's a great kind of pattern for how we can work with each other today in our churches, encouraging each other, encouraging people who are new to the faith. But there's a key in there that I think speaks to the Good Samaritan. Paul talks about encouraging them to increase in the good works. We know that you're a great people of prayer. We know that you are faithful. We've heard the wonderful things you are doing. Now let's try and put those things into action. What Jesus is talking about in the Good Samaritan is not what people claim to say they are. We are the rightful Jewish people. We are this, we are that, we are the other. We worship correctly. What Jesus is saying is, what did he actually do? What did the priest do? Just walk by on the other side of the street. What did the Levite, the ones who were really highly seen in the first century Jewish culture, what did he do? He just walked by as well, did nothing. But what did the Samaritan do? Well, he poured wine and oil on his wounds. He sent him to the inn, made sure he was being looked after, and then said, look, I'm going to come back and pay for everything else that you have done for this man, but make sure he's looked after. That is the pattern that Jesus sets for the Christian life. There's been so much said lately in the media. Remember, the media will always seek to divide. They will always seek to sensationalise. That's what they sell. It's how they make their living. It's their job. It's what they're trained to do. But there has been so much said about people who stand up and claim to be Christian. And they're praised by one. All of these wonderful Christian people, they're praised by one side and they're maligned by the other. But it's simply on the basis of them claiming to be something. Even worse than that, some people choose to promote certain things which are exclusive and exclude certain parts of our society and incredibly judgmental. But it's okay because they claim to be religious. Or they claim to be one of us. The teaching of the Good Samaritan shows that that is false. That is not the sort of thing we should be striving after. In fact, it's those that seem so less like us and yet act the way that we claim to follow, we should be holding as examples. It's those who show mercy, not judgment, which should be our examples. It's the Pauls of this world who seek to encourage those who are broken. It's those who seek to follow the path of Jesus. When people reject him, when people don't worship the way that he would have, when people actually refuse to accept him, that he tells his disciples not to rebuke them back, but simply to move on to the next village and remember, in this next parable that I'm going to tell, these people are good too. In fact, these people can be closer followers of the teachings of God than even our own priests and our own leaders of society are at times. What a message. What a powerful story that would hit home to whoever was in his crowd. The most well-educated, who knew all of the legal reasons why these people were incorrect, and the least educated, who just accepted that they weren't one of him. And yet Jesus draws all of those people together. Those who knew all the reasons, those who just accepted them, and those who were rejected in the first place. This is the power of the gospel in action. So where's the rubber hit the road for us? Hopefully that's already ticking through in our minds. I know it wasn't mine when I was reading this. Pope Francis said, you pray for the poor, and then you feed them. That's how prayer works. We can say we're whatever we like. We can stand up and say we're Christian as much as we like. But if we don't actually live that, what does it mean? What do the Gospels say it means? It's good to be reminded that our ideology, our social stance, our political stance, is not our spirituality. It is not our religion. We should not get the two mixed. They should be in communication with each other, absolutely, but we can't confuse one for the other. How does it change our lives? How do we look any different to anyone else? What are we prioritising? I said a few weeks ago that this kind of strange morphed idea of church discipline really should be brought back to discipline of a prayer life. Are we people of prayer? Do we actually set aside time to pray? Are we a people that are willing to challenge ourselves, discipline ourselves enough to accept those we don't want to accept? Is our faith, is what we claim to be, making us more judgmental? Is it making us more partisan? Is it making us angrier and less loving people? Because if it is, we're probably doing something wrong there. Who was the one who was the neighbour to the man? Not the one who was angry, not the one who was more judgmental, the one who showed mercy. I think at times we put so many things in front of what we're trying to do as Christian people or as people of faith in any faith tradition. We certainly place economics before our spiritual decisions. We place looking a certain way and belonging to a certain part of society before what it means to be a follower of Christ. Our religious life, our life of prayer, our life of actually thinking about these important deep things and what it means for each of our decisions, for us theologically, and what it means for our relationship with God, and how we see the world, it should be the forefront of our minds. Not a secondary thought. When we support something, ministry, an industry, a business that's selling us something, what comes into our mind? Is it just how much it's going to hit our hip pocket, or is it, how does this work spiritually? Is it ethical? Does it help creation? What am I doing by supporting this? Not what does it say about me? So these are encouraging things. These are wonderful things. This is the truth that Christ has to offer each and every one of us. It's how we live our lives. It tells people and each other and ourselves what it means to be Christian. In fact, how we live our lives tells people what Christ has to proclaim. The example, the encouragement, the love of Paul should be in and amongst each and every single one of us. We should be looking to encourage, to be joyous. We're not called to perfection. We are called to mercy. We are called to love, and we're called to the discipline, which means being able to push past these things and put our spirituality and put Christ first in our hearts and in our minds. So we can thank God for the Samaritans of the world. We can thank God for the Pauls of the world, and we can give great and joyous praise that we get to come together, support each other in this mission, and move a little closer to the goal that waits for us. In the name of God, the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.